Hi, and welcome to Ginger English. I'm Sarah, and today we have an A2 level podcast for you. Today, I want to tell you a real story. It's about a woman, it's about an old house, and it's about letters that changed everything. Her name is Emily. Emily is 34 years old. Last year, her marriage ended. She felt sad. She felt lost. She didn't know what to do next. Life after a divorce is never easy. Emily felt like she was starting from zero. So Emily made a big decision. She moved to a small town in Oregon. She wanted a fresh start, a new life, a quiet place to heal. She chose a town near the coast with green hills and small shops. It was very different from the big city she used to live in. Emily found an old house. It was small, it was cheap, but it needed a lot of work. The walls were old, the floors were broken, the kitchen was falling apart. But Emily didn't care. She saw something special in this house, something that felt like home even before she moved in. She started to fix it up, day by day, room by room. It was hard work, but it helped her. It gave her something to focus on, something other than her pain. Every morning, she woke up early and picked up her tools. Neighbors saw her working and started to say hello. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Emily was working in the living room. She was removing an old wall. Suddenly, her hammer hit something hard, not wood, not stone. Something different. She stopped. She looked closer. There was a small hole in the wall, and inside, there was a box. An old wooden box covered in dust and cobwebs. Emily's heart started beating fast. What was this? Why was it hidden here? Questions filled her mind immediately. She carefully pulled the box out. It was covered in dust. It looked very old. Her hands were shaking a little. She wiped the dust away slowly, almost afraid of what she would find. She opened it slowly. Inside, there were letters. Many letters, old yellow paper, handwriting from a long time ago. The ink was faded, but still readable. Emily picked up the first letter. She began to read. Her eyes moved quickly across the old words. And that's when she found their names. Margaret and a young soldier named Thomas. The letters were love letters. From the 1960s, between two young people who loved each other very much. Every letter was full of hope, longing, and deep affection. Emily didn't know it yet, but these letters were about to change her life completely. She sat down on the dusty floor and kept reading one letter after another. Who was Margaret? Who was Thomas? And why were these letters hidden inside her wall for over 50 years? Emily needed answers. She needed to know their story. Stay with me. This story gets more emotional with every part. Emily sat on the floor for a long time. She read letter after letter. Each one told her more about two young people from the past. Margaret was 18 years old in 1965. She lived in this same house with her parents. She was smart. She loved music. She loved to write in her journal every night. Thomas was 20 years old. He grew up in the same small town. He and Margaret went to the same school. They became friends first, then slowly they fell in love. The first letter was different from the others. It wasn't a love letter yet. It was simple. Thomas wrote about his new job at the factory. Margaret wrote back about her classes at school, but even in these simple words, Emily could feel something special. There was warmth between them. There was real connection. Then the letters changed. In early 1966, Thomas received a letter from the government. It was bad news. He was drafted into the army. He had to go fight in the Vietnam War. Emily's chest felt tight when she read this part. She knew this story wasn't going to be simple. She knew there was more pain coming. The next letter was from Margaret. She wrote it the night before Thomas left. Her words were full of fear. full of love, full of hope that he would come home safe. She wrote that she would wait for him no matter how long it took. Emily wiped a tear from her eye. She didn't expect to feel this way, but these were real people, real emotions, written many years ago, but still so powerful today. She continued reading. Thomas wrote his first letter from a military base in California. He talked about training, about other soldiers, about missing home, about missing Margaret every single day. Margaret wrote back quickly. She told him about the town, about her family, about the tree they used to sit under together. She said she looked at that tree every day and thought of him. Emily noticed something interesting. The letters weren't just romantic, they were also funny sometimes. Thomas joked about the terrible food at the base. Margaret joked about her little brother stealing her diary. These small details made Emily smile. Margaret and Thomas felt like real people to her now, not just names on old paper. But then Emily found a letter that changed the tone completely. It was from Thomas, sent from Vietnam. His words were different, heavier, more serious. He wrote that things were not what he expected there, but thinking of Margaret kept him strong. Emily held the letter close to her chest. She realized something important. This wasn't just an old love story. This was about survival, hope, and holding on to something precious during the hardest moments of life. She looked at the pile of letters still waiting to be read. There were so many more, and Emily knew deep in her heart that she needed to read every single one. Emily made herself a cup of tea. She wanted to keep reading, but she also wanted to slow down. This story was too important to rush. She picked up the next letter. It was from Thomas again. The date was late 1966. His handwriting looked tired. The words were shorter now. He wrote about long days and difficult nights. He wrote about missing simple things: a warm bed, quiet mornings, the smell of Margaret's mother's cooking. He didn't write much about the war itself, but Emily could feel the weight behind his words. Margaret's letters, on the other hand, stayed full of hope. She wrote about her plans for the future. She talked about the wedding they would have one day. She described the small house they would live in with a garden and a porch swing. Emily smiled at this part. It was sweet. It was innocent. Margaret believed with all her heart that Thomas would come home. But then something changed. Emily noticed a gap. The dates jumped forward. 3 months passed between one letter and the next. She wondered why. Did something happen? Did the letters get lost? Or was there a different reason? The next letter from Margaret felt different. Her tone was worried. She wrote that she hadn't heard from Thomas in weeks. She asked if he was okay. She asked him to write back soon, even just a few words. Emily's heart began to race a little. She kept reading, letter by letter, trying to understand what happened during those silent months. Finally, she found a letter from Thomas, dated months later than the last one. It was short, very short. He apologized for the silence. He said things had been difficult. He didn't explain more, but he promised Margaret he was still thinking of her every day. Emily paused. She realized these letters weren't just a love story anymore. They were becoming a mystery too. What happened to Thomas during those silent months? Why couldn't he write? She continued through the pile. The next several letters were shorter and further apart. Thomas wrote less about hope and more about exhaustion. Margaret's letters grew more anxious with each one. Then Emily found a letter that made her stop completely. It was from Margaret, but the handwriting was shaky, different from before. She wrote that she had received an official letter from the Army. She said Thomas was reported missing. Emily's hands trembled as she held the paper. She read the word again. missing. She sat in silence for a moment, staring at the letter. This story, which started as something romantic and sweet, had suddenly become something much darker. She needed to know what happened next. Did Thomas come home? Did Margaret ever see him again? Emily reached for the next letter in the pile, her heart pounding with both fear and hope. Emily held her breath. She reached for the next letter. Her hands were shaking a little. It was from Margaret, written 2 weeks after the last one. Her handwriting was still shaky, but there was something new in her words. Not hope exactly, but determination. She wrote that she refused to believe Thomas was gone. She said she would wait for more news. She said she would write to him anyway, even if the letters never reached him. She needed to keep talking to him, even into the silence. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. This wasn't just about Thomas anymore. It was about Margaret's strength too, her refusal to give up. The next several letters were all from Margaret. There was nothing from Thomas. Week after week, she kept writing. She wrote about her days, about small, ordinary things, the weather, her job at the local diner, her mother's health. It was like she was keeping a piece of him alive through these letters, even without answers. Then, after almost 2 months of silence, Emily found something different in the pile. A letter, but not in Thomas's handwriting. It was typed, official looking. Emily's stomach tightened. She read carefully. It was from the army. It said Thomas had been found. He was alive. He had been injured and separated from his unit for weeks. He was recovering in a hospital overseas. Emily let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Relief washed over her, even though this happened over 50 years ago, to people she never met. She quickly searched for the next letter, hoping to find Thomas's own words. And there it was. A letter from Thomas himself, written from the hospital. His handwriting was weaker than before, but it was truly his. He apologized for the long silence. He explained briefly what happened. An ambush, an injury, days of confusion and fear. He didn't share every detail, but he shared enough for Margaret, and now Emily, to understand how close she came to losing him forever. He wrote that during the worst moments, he thought only of her. Her face, her voice, her promise to wait. He said that promise was the reason he fought to survive. Emily pressed the letter to her chest. She felt like she was witnessing something incredibly personal, something not meant for a stranger's eyes, but she also felt honored to know their story. Margaret's response came quickly. Her words were full of joy, relief, and even more love than before. She wrote that she cried for hours after receiving the news. She wrote that she counted the days until his recovery and until his return home. Emily smiled through her own tears. Finally, some good news in this story. But she also noticed something. The letters mentioned Thomas's injury was serious. He would need a long recovery. He might not be the same when he came home. Emily wondered, what happened when Thomas finally returned? Did their love survive the changes the war brought? She reached for the next letter, eager to find out. Emily reached for the next letter. The pile was getting smaller now, and she felt a mix of excitement and sadness. She didn't want this story to end. The letter was from Thomas. He was still in the hospital, but his handwriting was stronger now. He wrote about the long days of recovery, about the other soldiers around him, some with stories even harder than his own. He wrote something that stayed with Emily. He said the hospital taught him how fragile life really was. He said he used to take simple things for granted: walking, sleeping without pain, waking up next to the people he loved. Now, he understood their true value. Margaret wrote back with warmth and patience. She told him not to rush his recovery. She said she would wait as long as it took. She said home would still be there when he was ready. Emily paused here. She thought about her own life, her divorce, her move to this small town. In some strange way, she understood what it meant to rebuild slowly, one small step at a time. The next letters showed progress. Thomas wrote about learning to walk again, about small victories, like standing without help for the first time. Margaret celebrated every single detail with him, even from thousands of miles away. Then, one letter announced wonderful news. Thomas was finally being sent home. Emily felt her heart race with excitement, even though she already knew, deep down, that this story happened decades ago. She couldn't help herself. She wanted them to be happy. The next letter was different from all the others. It was from Margaret, but it wasn't addressed only to Thomas. It read almost like a diary entry. She wrote about standing at the train station, waiting for him to arrive. She described her nervous hands, her racing heart, her fear that he might have changed too much. Emily could almost see the scene in her mind. The old train station, the crowd of families waiting. Margaret, alone in the middle of it all, searching every face for the one she loved. Then, Margaret described the moment she saw him. Thin, tired, walking with a slight limp, but alive. Truly alive. She wrote that she ran to him without thinking. She wrote that the crowd disappeared. The noise disappeared. There was only him. Emily wiped tears from her cheeks. She hadn't expected a simple letter to affect her this deeply, but it did. The next few letters were less frequent. Emily realized why. Thomas and Margaret were together now. They didn't need to write to each other anymore. But then near the bottom of the box, Emily found one more letter. It was dated years later. And this one felt very, very different from all the others. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she opened this last letter. The paper felt different, softer, more worn, as if it had been read many times before being hidden away. It was from Margaret, dated almost 10 years after Thomas came home. And the tone was completely different from anything Emily had read before. Margaret wrote that Thomas passed away. Not in the war, but years later, from complications related to his injuries. He had lived a good life after returning home. They got married. They bought this very house together. They planted a garden, just like Margaret once dreamed. But his body never fully healed from what happened overseas. Emily felt her chest tighten. After everything, the fear, the silence, the reunion, the joy. This was how the story ended. She kept reading. Margaret's words were full of grief, but also gratitude. She wrote that she didn't regret a single day of loving him. She wrote that even a shortened life together was better than a lifetime without him. She described their years together in the house. Small moments. Sunday mornings with coffee on the porch. Thomas fixing the fence every spring. Their quiet laughter in the kitchen. Emily realized she was sitting in the exact rooms where these memories happened. Margaret wrote that she placed his letters, and her own, into this box. She wrote that she hid them inside the wall during one of their home renovations, as a way to keep their story safe forever, inside the house they built together. She wrote one more thing. She hoped that someday someone would find these letters. She hoped that whoever found them would understand that real love, the kind worth waiting for, worth fighting for, still exists. Emily sat in complete silence for a long moment. Tears fell freely down her face now. She thought about her own broken marriage, her own fear that love wasn't real, or that she wasn't capable of finding it again. But here, in her hands, was proof. Proof that love could survive war, distance, injury, and even time itself. Emily made a decision right then. She needed to find out what happened to Margaret. Was she still alive? Did she have children? Grandchildren? Did anyone know these letters existed? She carefully placed all the letters back into the box. She knew, without any doubt, that this box held more than just old paper. It held a piece of history, a piece of someone's heart. Emily picked up her phone. She began searching online for any information about Margaret and Thomas, their full names, written clearly at the bottom of the final letter. She had no idea what she would find, but she knew she couldn't stop now. Emily searched online for hours. She typed different combinations of names, town history, and old newspaper archives. At first, she found nothing useful, but then she discovered a local historical society website for the town. She sent them an email explaining everything: the letters, the names, the house. She attached photos of a few pages, careful to keep most of the content private and respectful. 2 days later, she received a response. The woman from the Historical Society said she recognized the name Margaret immediately. Margaret had been a well-known member of the community for decades. She had passed away just 3 years earlier, at the age of 76. Emily's heart sank a little. She was hoping to meet Margaret in person, to return the letters herself, to hear her voice. But the email continued. Margaret had a daughter. Her name was Susan. She still lived in the same town, only 20 minutes away from Emily's new home. Emily's hands shook as she read the contact information. She sat there for several minutes, unsure what to do next. Should she call? Should she write a letter of her own first? Finally, she decided to send a short, respectful email to Susan. She explained who she was, what she found, and asked if Susan would like to see the letters. The response came faster than Emily expected. Susan wrote back within an hour. She said she had heard stories about her parents' letters, but never knew what happened to them after the house was sold. She said she would love to meet Emily as soon as possible. They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in town 2 days later. When the day arrived, Emily felt more nervous than she expected. She carefully packed the box of letters and drove to the coffee shop. Susan was already there when Emily arrived. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes that reminded Emily immediately of the warmth in Margaret's letters. They sat down together. Emily gently placed the box on the table. Susan stared at it for a long moment before opening it slowly. As Susan read through a few of the letters, her eyes filled with tears. She said she remembered her parents' love story, but she never imagined she would hold their actual words in her hands. She told Emily more about her parents' life, about the years of happiness in that house, about her father's quiet strength, even after everything he went through, about her mother's endless devotion to him until his very last day. Susan looked up at Emily with a grateful smile. She said this box meant more to her than Emily could ever understand. Then Susan said something that surprised Emily completely. She invited Emily to visit her parents' grave with her so Emily could see with her own eyes that this story, the one hidden in her walls, was completely, beautifully real. Emily accepted Susan's invitation. A few days later, they visited the small cemetery just outside town. Susan led her to 2 matching gravestones side by side under a large oak tree. Margaret and Thomas together again, just like in every letter Emily had read. Emily stood there quietly. She thought about everything these 2 people went through. The fear of war, the pain of separation, the joy of reunion. And finally, decades of quiet love inside the very house Emily now called home. She realized something important standing there. Love isn't always easy. It isn't always simple or perfect. Sometimes it involves waiting, fear, and uncertainty. But real love, the kind Margaret and Thomas shared, is worth every difficult moment. Emily thought about her own divorce, her own fear that she might never find real love again. But standing at this graveside, she felt something shift inside her. Hope, maybe. Or simply the belief that love, in all its forms, is still possible. Before they left, Susan asked Emily an unexpected question. She asked if Emily would like to keep the letters, since she found them, and since she now lived in the house where this love story unfolded. Emily was surprised but deeply touched. She agreed, promising to keep them safe and to always remember the story behind them. In the months that followed, Emily continued renovating her house, but now every room felt different. Warmer somehow, like it carried a piece of Margaret and Thomas's love inside its walls. Emily also became close friends with Susan. They had coffee together often, sharing stories about their families, their lives, and the strange, beautiful way this old box of letters brought them together. This story reminds us of something powerful. Sometimes the walls around us hold more history than we could ever imagine. Sometimes love doesn't disappear. It waits patiently to be discovered again. That's it for today's episode of Ginger English. I really hope this story touched your heart the way it touched mine while writing it. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new story. Give this video a like if it moved you, even a little, and share it with someone who might need a little reminder that real love still exists. Thank you so much for listening today. I'll see you in the next episode. Take care and goodbye for now.